Hi guys, and welcome to yet another Devcast. It's been some time since I released the Dash Devcast, so I decided to do one, and I will show you some new features that came with the 0.13.4 and now with .5, and most of that will be focused on prefab and variable workflow, how to work in with variables that override the graph variables and are part of the Dash controller instead of the part of the graph. So let's jump right into it. I have this simple graph. I did a tutorial on this graph. It's basically showing you a menu with the title coming from the button from bottom and then the buttons from the left. So it's a very simple graph. It's the initial state that initialize the position of the items where where will they be animated from, and then there is this animation in part that animates those items in. I also created a few variables that control some parts of the animation, like the delay of the children and the speed of the children and the initial delay before it actually runs. So let me show you one thing that I find that most of you don't are not aware of, and that is working with references. And I mean variable references, not references in the traditional way. For example, we have this initial state that initializes this position to 350, which is up, and then we have the animation that animates it back down. It's a relative position, and if you, for example, if you want to change this, you need to change this because it's relative. One thing that you can do is actually do a variable with the offset, and then use the variable in both of these nodes. Similar in the content, it animates from minus 2000. But there is another way, and that is using this as part of this. So you have a single point where you actually change these variables, and that is referencing this value. So if you right click, I showed it in one of the devcasts, so but I'm just reiterating because most of you don't know, and then you can copy the reference. You can copy any reference. It's a node. It's a field on a node. So I will copy this reference, and then instead of having this value, I will paste this reference. It will create an expression, and this expression is actually referencing this. So if I change this to 500, oh, I need to do one more thing because we don't really want this value. We want the inverse of this value. We have the negative value. So I'm going to change this to the inverse value. As you can see, this is one of the new features of the 0.13.5, and that is it will automatically collapse the expressions. So if you have large expressions, unless you are focusing on it, it will be always a single line. That's why you see these three dots. And another feature is there is a new expression editor that I'm working on, so you can just click to it and you have a syntax highlighting for the expressions. So this is the syntax for referencing. If you want, you can manually reference. You don't really need to go to from copy to paste. You need these brackets and a dollar sign, which means that this is the ID of the node that is referenced, and this is the value that is referenced. We were referencing the to position. So, and I want the inverse value. I cannot do this because expression cannot be evaluated. It doesn't work. It always needs to be explicit. So we are going to use the inverse function, which is part of the function library for the expressions. So this takes the value, which is here. It can be any vector or float or double or so on, and it will create an inverse value from that. So this is a vector 2. It will be an inverse value of this vector. And as you can see, it works. And now if I change this to, for example, 3000, and I want to see it, so I will increase the time. It will go from the from the 3000 automatically, and I don't need to set the value in two places. So let's change it back. Okay. And now there is one more thing I can show you here, which is new to 0.13.5, and that is that you can debug these expressions or the value. Because if I wanted, a lot of you mentioned that if you wanted to debug some kind of, if this expression is evaluated correctly and so on, you always needed the logic and debug and then work with the expression here. But it's tedious and you need to create an additional node for that. So now if I want to know about this value, I can simply enable debug. You will see that this expression has a debug enabled. I will also add some kind of highlight to the node, so we will see which nodes have a debug there. But now if I run it, I'll see that there is a debug on animate anchored position, which is this node, and it's a two position parameter, and the value is evaluated to 0 minus 350. So you can work with that and work with your expressions if they are evaluated correctly. So and finally, working with prefabs and variables. As you know, if I change this variable, any instance of this graph will have the same variable. So if I want the multiple prefabs of different menus, for example, I cannot really change these variables. I need to create variables that are bound to the controller. So that's what dash variables controller is about. And I could create these variables that I want to have, because in expression evaluation, the variables on the controller have precedence over the variables inside the graph. So if there is a variable on the controller with the same name as the variable on the graph, the controller variable will be used instead. That's because it's used for overriding. So let's say that I want to override the child speed, for example. There is this feature with the 0.13.5 that will come out, is that it will automatically know that there is a dash controller and it has some kind of variables, so you can override. It will tell you which variables you can override, so it will basically create the variable for you that's on the graph, and it will also put the default value that you have on the graph there. You can also just create all the overrides. And now what came with 0.13.4 is that now prefab instances can have variable prefab overrides. So you can see that this prefab has a different values. You can even see it here that there is overrides, because this is customly serialized. It's not something that's supported by Unity by default, as I would say. So I created a custom serialization that added the support for the overrides of the variables as well. They are generic types, so it's not something that Unity can support and does support from by default. So now if I run this, the child speed will be 1 second instead of the default, which is on the graph, which is 0.2 seconds. With the prefab override support, you can also, if you wanted to, you can now override the graph as well. Not part of the graphs, but you can have multiple instances of the controller, of the same controller, if you want it for some reason in each of them. Each of them can have different graph. My mic just got shut down again, so So that's it pretty much for the 0.13 and dot 4 and dot 5. You can check the changelog as well. There was a lot of stuff that came with the 0.13.4, and now dot 5 is adding the, as I said, the expression editor, the debugging, some fixes for null checks and uh, children retargeting that were reported to me. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And also, any feedback is really welcome because there is a lot of you that have different workflows. And for example, with the debug, as I said, it was tedious to create the debug notes. So I'm glad that people, at least if they don't offer a solution, they at least ask if there is a way to do something, especially if it's a repetitive task, do something in a better way. So I'm always looking for these UX and functionality feedback loops that create a better product at the end of the day. So thank you and see you next time.